Good afternoon. My name is Melvin FOOTE. I'm the president of the Constituency for Africa in Washington, D.C., and I'm in Cambridge, Maryland, to launch the CFA 2020 Ronald H. Brown African Affairs Series. And we're doing it with a town hall meeting named in honor of Harriet Tubman, who originated here in Cambridge. This morning we had a building of a beautiful statue and a tremendous program. This is all part of the Day of Resilience here in Cambridge, where we look to educate Americans and build linkages among ourselves around Africa and African issues. So we have a very exciting program today. I'm not going to spend my time because I'm going to come back later in the program, but I want to start us off. We have the mayor of Cambridge, the Honorable Victoria Stanley Jackson, who is the mayor of Cambridge, Maryland, is going to offer her welcoming remarks. So without further ado, let me call on the mayor of Cambridge, Maryland, Victoria Stanley Jackson. Madam Mayor.
Miss Jeannine, I don't see the mayor online. Is it?
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can.
I don't know. So you may want to just, let me just tell Mel to move on.
Take it off. No, take it off. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Technology is wonderful when it works. My name is Victoria Jackson Stanley, and I'm the mayor of the beautiful, historic city of Cambridge. I want to welcome everyone to this Day of Resilience Town Hall. We're really excited that you all have joined in from across the country and across the world, dare I say. But I'm really humbled that you all chose to be on this particular forum today. It's a beautiful day in the city of Cambridge, Maryland, and we are really grateful that you are part of this program. The microphone loves me and I love the mic, but I've been told that I need to keep it short. So I'll just say, welcome to Cambridge. Whatever you're in the city of Cambridge, Maryland, consider yourself at home. We appreciate you coming aboard with us, and we look forward to the town hall meeting and the wonderful message that we have presented for you. I want to thank Alpha Genesis, give a shout out to my homies here in Cambridge for putting on a wonderful program. And again, thank you for joining in and have a great day. Bye.
Okay, I'm back with you. My job now is to introduce our moderator, who is Adrian Harewood with the Canadian Broadcasting Company. I believe a corporation company. Adrian is up in Canada. We've built a strong partnership over the last several months He's one of the top journalists, and one of the top Black journalists in Canada. So I persuaded him to be the moderator. He has a lot of historical background. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Adrian Harewood. Adrian.
Well, Mel, thank you very much. Thanks so much for that very kind and generous introduction. It's a delight to be a part of this historic event. And in this town hall meeting, we're paying special tribute to the legacy and indomitable spirit of the African-American abolitionist, freedom fighter, rescuer, hero, Harriet Tubman, and discussing ways in which to strengthen linkages and ties amongst African people throughout the diaspora. As Mel mentioned, my name is Adrian Harewood. I work for the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I'm the anchor, the co-anchor actually, of the 6 o'clock news here in Ottawa, the capital of the country. And Harriet Tubman is, of course, a cherished daughter of the United States, one of the icons of the US freedom movement. But as an African Canadian with roots in the Caribbean and in Africa, I'm going to boldly declare that Harriet Tubman belongs to all of us. We hold her memory and example very close to our hearts. She was a gift to the world. She epitomized resilience and resistance. Her life was the embodiment of the relentless quest for freedom. She was born Araminta Ross in Dorchester County, Maryland in 1822, born an enslaved person. She would go on to lead an extraordinary life. She was brutalized by the people who called themselves her masters. Those beatings, those harrowing experiences marked her. In 1849, she managed to escape the depredations and the horrors of that condition. What makes Harriet Tubman's story so astonishing isn't just that she was able to escape from slavery. That was indeed a feat unto itself. But that after finding freedom, she rescued on over a dozen occasions hundreds of people. She went back into the belly of the beast, the site of her trauma and the traumas of her loved ones. She proceeded to free family members and friends. She risked everything to liberate members of her community. She understood that she could not truly be free until her entire community was free. Hers was a life of service, a life dedicated to emancipation. Think of all the lives that she changed thanks to her courage and generosity of spirit, thanks to her humanity, her faithfulness, and her love. She guided many fugitives to the country that I call home, Canada. The late great African-American novelist and Nobel laureate Toni Morrison once said this, quote, "I tell my students when they get these jobs that you have been so brilliantly trained for, just remember that your real job is that if you are free, you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else." Harriet Tubman provided the template for how we could all lead a good life. Through her example and her sacrifice, she showed us the way to pursue our freedom dreams and to build bridges across borders. She taught us how to be resilient, how to carry on in spite of the obstacles, how to create new futures, futures filled with possibilities. She was linking the diaspora all of her life. Her way must be our way. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker for this afternoon. Dr. Julianne Malveaux is a labor economist, noted author, and commentator. She's been described by Dr. Cornel West as, quote, the most iconoclastic public intellectual in the United States. Dr. Malveaux's writing has appeared in USA Today, Black Issues in Higher Education, Ms. Magazine, Essence Magazine, and The Progressive. I must say that I grew up reading her some 25 years ago. I remember reading her very, very well when I was in university at McGill in the late 1980s, early 1990s. She spent, for more than a decade, her weekly columns appeared in the Los Angeles Times, the Charlotte Observer, New Orleans Tribune, Detroit Free Press, and San Francisco Examiner. She's hosted television and radio programs on CNN, BET, PBS, NBC, ABC, Fox News, it goes on and on. Dr. Melvin has been a contributor to academic life since receiving her PhD in economics from MIT in 1980. She's been on the faculty or visiting faculty of numerous universities, including the New School for Social Research, the University of California, Berkeley, and Howard University. She holds numerous honorary degrees. Currently, Dr. Melvin is the honorary co-chair of the Social Action Commission of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, and she serves on the boards of the Economic Policy Institute, as well as the Recreation Wish List Committee of Washington, D.C. It gives me great honor, and it is certainly my privilege to introduce Dr. Julianne Melvin.
Well, my brother, thank you so much for that kind and very thorough introduction. I really appreciate it, but also the background information that you gave us about Harriet Tubman, because it's really important for us to understand in this moment of Black Lives Matter that Black lives have always mattered. Many have ignored that. Our lives have always mattered. They mattered to Harriet because she kept coming back to get people. She kept coming back to get people because she could not stand the thought of enslavement. And we have so many people in our history that she exemplifies, and we need to talk about them too. What I'd like to say to my African brothers and sisters, as Mel Foote always puts together something that really does transcend boundaries. He wants to make sure that we African people know each other, understand what our challenges are, understand what we have in common and what we don't have in common. Here is what we do have in common. Here's what we do have in common. We have all been victims of predatory capitalism. And predatory capitalism essentially has enslaved Black people. It has exploited Africa, and we can go down the list. So the same devils, and I use the words devils advisedly, the same devils who came to the continent to take us, came back to the continent to extract materials, to extract metals, and some of them are still doing it. So we need to look at our common enemy, which is racist, predatory capitalism. And capitalism is about basically what factors of production get paid. When you look at that from the perspective of where we are with the wealth gap in the African American community, with the wealth gap in the world, when you look at those differences, what you must say is, even as we talk about liberation, we must talk about basically the modification of capitalism. There would be no United States of America were there not enslavement. We did the work. I don't even call the place that the president lives the White House anymore. I call it the place that enslaved people built, because I want people to understand when you have people saying, well, we want to keep our Confederate flag up. Really? You really want to align yourself with the forces of evil? I don't think so. When we look at this history and we learn it, we learn that African American people and African people, we're extremely capable people. What has prevented us from equality has been laws that have oppressed us. If you look at the end of enslavement, there was a man named George White. George White was the last congressman we had in the United States in the 19th century. We didn't have anybody else until the mid-1940s. When George White gave his closing remarks to the Congress, he listed what Black people had. He said, we have $170 million worth of wealth. We have, I think it's 175,000 100,000 acres of land. We support 11 schools. And we did this without any help. So no 40 acres and a mule, but we did it anyway. But when Reconstruction ended, basically conservative whites plotted to ensure that Black people couldn't have anything. And in my forthcoming book, I talk about a concept called white economic envy, whereas white people believed that Black people should not have anything that they didn't have. That if Black people have more, they would take it. And they very often did. They did not want the terms and conditions of competition to exist. They did not want they had thingified us, in the words of Dr. King. They had thingified us so that they could treat us as less than people and then take our rights away from us. And they did it again and again. The first lynching that Ida B. Wells investigated, Ida B. Wells was our great journalist, great chronicler of lynchings. The first one that she investigated was of a man named Thomas Moss. Thomas Moss was her friend, and she was his daughter's godmother. Thomas Moss had the nerve to start a store that competed with a white-owned store. He had the nerve to, why did he do it? Because the white-owned store was nasty. The man had 10 citations for selling alcohol, which was illegal in 1896. He was a horrible human being. So Tommy Moss set up a store. They're catty-corner from each other. He did everything he could to try to get that store closed. Then two little boys, one black, one white, got in a fight over marbles. This basically had white people going to this man's store with guns over kitty marbles. Of course, the brothers had theirs too, so they were ready for it. But whenever a black man dared defend himself, the consequences were massive. The three men, Tommy Moss and his two friends, were lynched. They were arrested and then they were lynched because he dared compete economically. What message does that send to other black folks who want to compete economically? What message does that send to Black Americans about this economic system? This is why the work needs to be done. And this is why we in the United States and on the African continent and my brother in Canada and around the world, we have to look at predatory capitalism as one of the precursors to Black exploitation. And when we look at it that way, then we begin to have a conversation about how to have a tax system that works for us. 45 in there, I don't curse on Zoom. So I'm not gonna, you know who I'm talking about. 45 in there has passed laws to make sure his friends can get richer. But wants to cut food stamps, but increase the tax deduction for corporate lunches. That's what we're dealing with. And so when we talk about unpacking predatory capitalism, we have to understand that we only have it because these folks are gaining while other people are losing. We have a wealth gap because they're gaining while other people are losing. And so our work beyond this powerful tribute to Harriet Tubman that we saw this statue today, our work is to really begin to coalesce across national lines around this evil system that is exploiting people. But as I talk about, Mel Foote picked Harriet Tubman's, this whole thing to talk about resilience. And that is, if there's any quality of Black people, that would be the quality. We're still here. We're not supposed to be here. Some people thought we were gonna be gone a long time ago, but we're still here. And not only still here, we're doing our thing. But there is still oppression and we need to get rid of that oppression. But the resilience piece, when you look at the history of Black people, but especially Black women, what you find is people keep coming. I want to tell you a story about a Black woman banker. I'm an economist, and so of course, I'm interested in her. Her name was Maggie Lena Walker. Maggie Lena Walker was founded, the first Black woman to found a bank. It was called Penny Savings Bank in 1903 in Richmond, Virginia. She founded her bank and it grew. It was an amazing possibility. But economic envy affected her. At that time, 1903 in Virginia, Black women did one of three things. You might be a school teacher, but there weren't that many jobs for school teachers. You could pick tobacco, or you could be a maid. And Maggie Lena said there have to be other opportunities. So she started a department store. And was able to hire over 20 people to work as clerks in the department store. But again, white economic envy. White folks were not having that. By 7 years later, her store had gone out of business. Here's what the devil did. They basically she got a lot of her supplies from New York. They went to New York and said to them, if you sell to Maggie Lena, we won't buy from you. Mm-hmm. And so then of course their orders started dwindling. But it was a wonderful experiment and basically, self-actualization. A wonderful experiment, and it reminds us that we can still do this kind of thing. I want to tell another story about a man named Anthony Porter. This is a horrible story, but again, it's about white economic envy. Mr. Porter owned 427 acres of what they call prize cotton land in Mississippi. Not Mississippi, I'm sorry, in Abbeville, Georgia. 427 acres, valued then at $20,000. Now it would be more than $500,000 value. In the newspaper, they described him as rich for a Negro and insolent too. Rich for a Negro and insolent too. He went to sell some of his cottonseed one day, And the white man standing in front of him in line was quoted a price of 90 cents per pound. But our brother Crawford was told he could have 85 cents a pound. He said, "You're trying to cheat me. You just offered the other man 90 cents. Then he told the man, "I would rather throw my cottonseed in the damn river," use the word damn, "than give it to you." He was arrested for cursing a white man because he said damn. He was arrested for cursing a white man. He was arrested, jailed. He bailed himself out. He had it like that. He was rich. So he had the bail was $15. He reached in his pocket, grabbed $15, and was hoping to be along his merry way. But then he was assaulted, beaten, and ultimately lynched. Now, the two main characters in this lynching were appointed by the city to be the executors of his estate. And the city council took a vote. Yeah, and that rolled, took a vote and said that the Crawford family had to leave town. So they lost everything. They lost it. There's stories like this are replete with this. So again, I want us to pull back. We can tell horrible stories, but let's look at the ways that predatory capitalism has caused some of this abuse to occur. And we look at the ways that this abuse has occurred, we ought to feel all the more inspired to stop this mess. We have the Black Lives Matter movement is wonderful. I love seeing the young people taking it to the streets. I used to do that back in the day. And I can't take a knee anymore because if I took a knee, somebody had to give me up. But you know, I'm there with them in spirit. And I love seeing them there, but we're hoping that all of our movements incorporate some aspects of economic justice. I mean, you know, people talk about marching. March your money out of white folks' pockets. That's the best march you can have. Because when we do that, what we actually do is reclaim our economic independence, our economic authenticity. And we have to do that. You know, I saw the sign, I went down to Black Lives Matter Plaza last week, and the signs are amazing. You know, people just raw emotion, pain, but also inspiration. And there was one sign that said, Black folks are 13.4% of the population. So don't put a Black Lives Matter sign up in your window if your staff is not 13.4% Black. And that's just extended. How many corporations do not have Black board members? And we still buy their stuff. You know, how many times you go to the store, you don't see any Black people. I mean, I walk down the street, I live in DC, which is a central street, 14th Street, and every store in the world has a Black Lives Matter sign on, including stores I know do not treat Black people well. So this is called the don't break my window insurance, as opposed to anything else. I have probably gone way too long, but I do want to tell one more. We all know this story, but we need to be reminded about Tulsa, Oklahoma, because that was also a case of white economic envy. Black people had everything they needed in Tulsa. Everything they needed. I mean, they had built their own hospital because that's how the hospital would let us in. Schools. And the schools were segregated. There was a Booker T. Washington High School. There was a pharmacist. There was a department store. We had all this stuff. And white folks were just envious. A Black man was the first to get a car in Tulsa and ended up owning an auto repair shop. A Black couple owned a theater that seated 700 people. We're talking 1921. So people had stuff. I happen to know more about Tulsa than I should because I had a friend who was one of the last survivors. Her name was Dr. Olivia Hooker. She, of course, was a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. But she was also, she just died last year. And before she died, she talked to us about all of this. She remembered what happened. She was a 6-year-old child. She remembered hiding under the tablecloth, under the table, while these white folks came in and ransacked their house. Ransacked their house. She said she remembers people breaking her mother's Caruso records. Because, again, it was just economic envy. How dare Black people have this stuff that we don't have? And so the ruse, and I always call it the ruse, when people tell you about rapes, they usually say a Black man raped a white woman, lies, 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 lies. Usually they just make that stuff up. In this particular instance, a young man named Dick Rowland, 19 years old, and a young white lady named Sarah Page, 17 years old, they have known each other. There's some say But whatever it was, the elevator up the top took you to the top floor, which was the only place that a Black man could use the restroom. He was a shoe shine boy. Only place he could use the restroom in downtown Tulsa. So he took the elevator up, and somehow, but you know those old-fashioned elevators, somehow he jostled her. Physical contact was made. It was not a hit or a strike or anything. But a white man saw them and went out and said, Dick Rowland raped Sarah Page. And the next thing you know, the newspaper had an article, "To lynch a Negro tonight." And they basically ruined over 1,000 homes and businesses, millions of dollars of property. We don't know how many people died. Some people say 100, some say 300, and some say even more. But again, this is economic envy. What does this have to do with the connection between Africans and African Americans? All of us have to resist. Resilience is a part, and on the African continent, one of the resistances has to be resistance to exploitive US public policy. And people like Mel Foote are doing the work to make sure that when public policy is made regarding Africa, that our voices are in the mix. We have to be the ones to say to others, this is not happening. But again, if we speak for the African continent, y'all gotta listen. I am amazed at the number of African countries, and I hope I'm not on thin ice here, Mel, but I probably am. I am most of the time. But I mean, I'm amazed at the number of African countries who have white PR firms, who don't know anything about anything except for how to take their money. When we have thousands of Black-owned PR firms here in the United States. So the mutuality has to really be a mutuality. But I kind of want to close. I'm not really all over the place. I'm really talking about resistance and talking about how we resist and what we must do and what we must learn, and we must learn our history. I mean, when I talk about Maggie Lena Walker, people tell me, I don't know who that is. Well, you should. If anybody tells you they don't know who Harriet Tubman is, just lock them up in a hole somewhere, and because they don't want to know. But basically, we need to know this history. We need to know Tulsa. We need to know Ida B. Wells. And we Africans and African Americans need to know what we have in common. And we need to continue to do work to make sure we get to know each other. Sitting here in Cambridge, Maryland, to me is like sitting in solid ground. I mean, it's like hollow ground. It's like the ancestors' ground. And so I encourage everybody who's watching or listening to think about the solid ground that you must have as well. Your Southern ancestors, you know, many enslaved, many escaped, but also your ancestors on the continent. I think that if Black folks go to the African continent to see the multiplicity of opportunities and possibilities, then we will become far more inspired about the work we do and what our purpose there is in this life. Frederick Douglass, and this is his home stomping ground also, said, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did it, it never will. Those who want freedom without agitation are like those who want the ocean without its mighty roar." If we want freedom, we must agitate, agitate, agitate. Thank you very much, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Malveaux, for that very, thank you for that very incisive and trenchant commentary that you gave there. I was wondering if I could ask you just a couple of questions, though, before we get to our panel. And the first question was this, because you outlined the savagery of predatory capitalism. But the question I had is, are you imagining a world beyond predatory capitalism or a world beyond capitalism itself?
Well, certainly beyond predatory capitalism. Predatory capitalism has been advanced because of laws that basically favor capital over labor. In the United States, as an example, the National Labor Relations Board is crippled because it does not have enough appointments. The union movement has been attacked. And one of the few ways that Black people get fair wages is through unions, through collective bargaining and organizing. So I constantly imagine a world beyond capitalism, but I also say that in the very short run, what I'd like to see is at least to see the predatory nature go away. And let me help you out. I went to MIT, which is not exactly the bastion of social economics. So, so those of us who went to the MIT, when we reimagine probably not as radically as we might have heard talking about something. else. But it is something constantly on my mind. How do we have a better world where people get paid for their work, where people are not exploited, where our lands are free, where our water is clean? Those are the things that I imagine.
Share with us more of your dreams. And I'm interested in what this world beyond capitalism would look like. So in concrete terms, if you can kind of paint a picture to us as to how that world would better serve people of African descent.
Well, the first, if you look at the wage structure right now, Black people make about 60% of what white people make. We have about 10% of the wealth that whites have. This is because of systematic extraction of our wealth from our community, systematic extraction of our labor. So the biggest question is, how do you make sure that people are paid fairly? How do we get racial economic justice? And I believe that predatory capitalism is incompatible with racial economic justice. So, again, the question, how does this look, is provocative because, and good provocative because it makes us think, because we would then have to answer questions about corporate structure. We have to answer questions about shareholder participation. We'd have to answer all those kinds of questions, which might be challenging to answer. But let's begin to pull the questions and answers together. I think that from a presidential perspective here in the United States, Bernie Sanders may have come closest to that, but Bernie didn't get it on race. He just didn't get it on race, but he came closest to talk about restructuring the economic system. I think Elizabeth Warren also comes close to looking at restructuring, although she would dismantle some structures but not others, like especially the predatory nature of banking is something that she's been absolutely opposed to. We've had others who have jumped out there with thoughts and ideas about how we could restructure the system, but believe me, it would not only take a long time, it would take political will and major commitment.
Well, Dr. Malveaux, thank you very much for that. And I'm going to ask you to stay with us because we're going to ask you to participate in the panel that I'm about to introduce right now. So thank you very much for those initial comments of yours. And right now, I'd just like to introduce our panelists. Dr. Robert Ducey is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Cooperation and African Integration for Togo. It's a position that he's held since 2013. He is the African, Caribbean, and Pacific's chief negotiator and chief of the Ministerial Central Negotiating Group for the new ACP-EU partnership post-Cotonou 2020. Minister Ducey is a former seminarian, friar, and monk. He is also a professor of political philosophy. He specializes on the issues of peace, management, and the resolution of armed conflict. He's also a Renaissance man. He's also a novelist and a writer. In 2015, 2016, and also 2019, he was named by the magazine New African one of the 100 most influential personalities on the African continent. Dr. Julius Garvey is a renowned vascular surgeon who received medical degrees at what many of us consider the best university in North America, McGill University in Montreal. He is the second born son of the Universal Negro Improvement Association founder Marcus Garvey and activist Amy Jakes Garvey. Dr. Garvey is a former professor and instructor of surgery at Columbia University, the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and the State University of New York at Stony Brook. He also served as an attending surgeon in cardiothoracic surgery at the Harlem Hospital Center. He served as the chief of thoracic and vascular surgery at Queens Hospital Center and was chief of vascular and thoracic surgery at Wyckoff Heights Medical Center. Dr. Garvey was a certified fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons, the American College of Surgeons, the International College of Surgeons, and the American College of Chest Physicians, as well as a diplomate of the Board of Cardiothoracic and Vascular Surgery, the American Board of Surgery, the American Academy of Wound Management, and the American College of Phlebology. Quite a list there. Izmira Violet Aitch is the Senior International Affairs Advisor to Wisconsin's 4th Congressional District, where she is responsible for the trade, economic uplift, international education, and diplomacy portfolios with special concentration on the well-being of marginalized populations globally and locally. She liaises with the likes of the African Union and the European Union to design and implement policies and protections for people of African descent. Before joining the US House of Representatives staff in 2013, she worked as a macroeconomics trainer at the Central Bank of Germany and the European Central Bank in Frankfurt, Germany. As an African internationalist, she has conducted field research on the convergence and disintegration of global Black solidarity in over 40 countries, and is an active member of several Pan-African political organizations, both in the United States and abroad. She earned a master's degree in global political economy and international conflict research from the University of Frankfurt, and she was conferred with dual Bachelor of Arts degrees in global management and German philology from the University of Wisconsin. Welcome, Izmira. Eureka Huggins-Axum is the Senior Assistant Director for the International Visitor Leadership Program at the Institute of International Education, where she is responsible for management of short-term professional exchange programs, including the prestigious U.S. Department of State International Visitor Leadership Program. Ms. Huggins-Axum is the co-founder and director of the International Affairs for the African Diaspora Ancestral Commemoration Institute. As a cultural activist and leader, she's also the public relations director for the internationally renowned Kankaran West African Dance Company. Ms. Huggins-Axum is also the docent at the Smithsonian Museum of African Art. She holds an MBA in International Management from the University of Maryland and is currently serving on the US Board of Directors of the Center for Black Culture and International Understanding, and the Africa Union's Pan-African Diaspora Women's Association, or PADWA, a special initiative of the African Union's mission in Washington, D.C. Welcome. Welcome, Eureka. Is Eureka here? I'm not sure if Eureka's here yet. Okay. And finally, Mr. Melvin Foote. Mel Foote is a pioneer in the field of African affairs. He has over 35 years of experience and has worked in over 30 African countries. He's recognized as a leading expert on issues related to African policies and programs. He is the founder of the Constituency for Africa, whose mission is to build public and private support for Africa and to help shape a progressive US policy towards the continent. He's also the founder of the African American Unity Caucus and serves as an advisor to the African Union's ambassador to Washington. He has participated in numerous high-level missions to Africa, including as a participant on a White House delegation to assess the genocide in Rwanda in 1994. He's also also traveled to Ethiopia and Eritrea in 1990 to end that conflict. And he's also promoted US trade with Africa with the African Growth and Opportunity Act. He is recipient of numerous awards and recognitions that include the Order of the Lion Award, which is the highest public service honor of the government of Senegal, and the Congressional Black Caucus's 2001 Annual Legislative Conference's Diggs Award for Foreign Affairs in recognition of his outstanding commitment and achievement on issues and concerns pertaining to Africa. So Mel, welcome, and that is our panel. And what I thought I would do is I thought I would begin with you, Izmira, and I wanted you to just to get your response to what you've heard so far from Dr. Malveaux.
Sure, thank you, Adrian. So first, allow me to state a brief disclaimer that the views I express are definitely my own and don't necessarily reflect United States Congress or the particular member in whose office I work. So, I mean, Dr. Julianne Malveaux, super sister warrior, someone I've looked up to for many years and worked closely with in US Congress since I came in 2013. She is spot on when it comes to predatory capitalism. They can't coexist in the same place as racial justice here in the United States or in a global political paradigm that is about justice and progress, especially for people of African descent. There's an old adage that Black people wake up on the wrong side of capitalism every single day. And as she knows, working in United States Congress, it can be quite a hostile place if you don't neatly fit into the two-party polarized system that both have way too heavy doses of the perpetuation of the current oppressive, unjust system of capitalism upon which this nation and the world has been founded. So I echo, I amplify everything she said. She's a woman of my own heart. I love her so much, and I don't know, I can't imagine how much more difficult my time at work would be without knowing that people like her exist in the trenches and in academia. She's all over. I mean, she recently testified on the historic Juneteenth hearing for HR 40, this piece of reparations legislation that is in the United States House of Representatives Judiciary Committee now. I could say so much, but I amplify, magnify, and echo everything she says. It's spot on, and I wish other people, especially elected officials at the federal level, felt the same way. I mean, she mentioned how Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren as presidential candidates were probably the most well aligned with the sentiment that we've been expressing. But we saw how they were, particularly Bernie Sanders, was railroaded because, again, he does not neatly fit into this two-party polarized binary system that no other advanced democracy that I know subscribes to. And that includes, you know, what happened to him in my home state of Wisconsin, where he won the primary, but then the general election was won by the dude who occupies the White House right now. So I celebrate her, like I said, like Harriet Tubman, she's another super sister warrior. And we need her in US Congress, and we need her voice, you know, influencing and advising these members who are very, I will say, antiquated in their view of economics, injustice, class, race, and all of the intersections.
Izmira, maybe I can ask you this question. I just wanted to push you a bit further because you've spent much of your professional life building those linkages throughout the African diaspora. And I was curious as to what you see as being the possibilities for African liberation in those linkages that you and others have been building over decades.
Yeah, well, let me just note that as we talk about honoring our ancestors, and Dr. Melvin touched upon this quite richly, that, excuse me, I stem from a staunch line of Garveyites, and of course, Dr. Garvey, my honorary granddaddy, is also on this call, who I look forward to hearing from later. But yeah, I come from a staunch line of Garveyites. My daddy's people are from Missouri, owners of some of that fertile farmland that surrounds St. Louis along the Mississippi River. And when my great-grandfathers and his brothers returned from Europe, fighting and winning in World War I, of course, they had a renewed and rightful sense of entitlement of the liberties and civil rights enshrined in the Constitution. And one of their mottos was, "The new Negro has no fear," as they were confronted by the horrific terror of the Jim Crow era. As Dr. Melvin mentioned, the massacres of Black folks in our centers of wealth that swept through my ancestral city of East St. Louis, Elaine, Arkansas, Tulsa, Oklahoma. And of course, this time coincided with the rise of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, this massive organization that Marcus Garvey founded in the 19 teens. So my great-grandfather and my great-great-uncles, along with several other World War I veterans, were what was called the Garvey Knights, K-N-I-G-H-T-S, the Garvey Knights, the cavalry or security forces that guarded and housed the Right Honorable Marcus Garvey as he moved through the Midwest, electrifying Black folk and organizing us into action in glory in one of the largest, well, I think the largest proportionally mass movements this world ever has seen, before Facebook, before the internet. You know, I think Pony Express is how we communicated back then. I mean, so it really was a monumental feat, the way he organized and stitched together these deliberately disjointed pieces of our diaspora that had been far flung and still are far flung all over the world. So I just wanted to contextualize that for at least my portion of the conversation, honoring our ancestors, our common ancestors, and my personal ancestors. But I guess in contemporary times, and Adrian, I'm sorry, I forgot the question I was going.
No, the question really was, what do you see as being the possibilities in forging these links that you've been engaged in forging, these links between African peoples in the diaspora for African liberation?
Oh, the possibilities are endless, boundless. It's really difficult to put a ceiling on what's possible. And this is the era for doing that. We have so many great events that are now coalescing and converging. We have the United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent that was declared from 2015 until 2024. We now have the, Mel mentioned his work with AGOA, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, and we're working tirelessly to sort of forge an element for Black people in the diaspora through U.S. Congress here in the United States, including Black businesses and in the United States into that deal. We have ECOWAS, who, the Economic Community of West African States, that has a very promising platform for inclusion with special protections and potential dual citizenship for descendants of the enslaved here in the US and throughout the Caribbean, South America, and the diaspora. We have Ghana's Year of Return declared from the current president in 2019. That was a proclamation declared in parallel with the House of Representatives Bill 1242, which recognized the 400th year commemoration of when the first enslaved prisoner of war African reached the British colonies, not all of America, but just the British colonies in Virginia, because there were Africans here long before 1619. But last year in 2019, we did successfully pass through the House and Senate, and it was ratified into law, this commemoration for the original enslaved Africans to set foot in the British colonies. Unfortunately, that law was quite anemic because there were very little funds, if any, allocated to it. But President Nana Addo Akufo-Addo of Ghana, he recognized the difficulty that we were experiencing with really, this initiative growing legs and the linkages to what is present day Ghana, where the majority of the dungeons of enslavement line the coast of the Atlantic. So this initiative of the Year of Return, I'm sure people here are familiar with it. That really was the year 2019, but now we're into Beyond the Return, which is much more robust initiatives that unfortunately have been a bit hampered by COVID, but it's open-ended. There is no close to it. So when the COVID shutdown is over, and in fact, the borders of Ghana just opened up, I'm actually flying there tonight to continue our work on really how to harmonize the diaspora, establishing rites of passage for those of us African Americans locked in the doldrums of the inner city, like my hometown of Milwaukee, unfortunately with the distinction of being rated one of the worst places in the country to be Black. We just saw recently what happened down the road from Milwaukee and Kenosha with Jacob Blake, but of course that's just one example of a long line of known and anonymous Black men and women who have been assaulted in that way. So there are, we have through the European Union in the past couple of years, through the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, in the US, it's known as the United States Helsinki Commission. It has a 57 country jurisdiction that includes Canada, your home country, the United States, and all countries in Europe and Russia that held the People of African Descent Week in that jurisdiction of 57 countries for the first time ever. Another People of African Descent Week in the European Parliament, where we were calling for special protections and rights and calculations, demographic calculations of Black Europeans throughout the European Union. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. The moment is ripe for stitching together the diaspora. And what I wanted to say about this year of return in Ghana, I mean, that was a model that many, many, many other West African nations now are replicating. Like I said, it was severely stifled by COVID, but the future is endless because especially the ECOWAS countries, or not just ECOWAS, but going further into Southwest Africa, all the way down to Cameroon, Namibia, where we were also stolen from. They saw these nations, these heads of states, saw the success of the year of return and are wanting to replicate a model customized for their country. I mean, we also have something called AfricanAncestry.com,
right.
Black-owned ancestry, lineage, DNA, ancestry tracers that pinpoints not what country you're from, because of course many of us were stolen from the motherland long before these boundaries were drawn in the Berlin Conference, and later in the when independence swept Africa in the 50s and the 60s. But actually identifying what kingdom, I mean, they say tribe, I don't like to use the word tribe, kingdom, dynasty, nation we are from in Africa. So there are all sorts of
many possibilities.
Yes. So I can go on and on, as you can see. I'm probably talking too long on that question.
It's fine.
But now's the time, is the point.
No, you know, and I want to, this is a nice segue, because I want to move to Dr. Garvey, you know, my fellow McGillian. Dr. Garvey, welcome.
Thank you.
Good. Dr. Garvey, I'm not sure, were you able to hear the address by Dr. Julianne Malveaux?
Yes, I did.
Could you just give me your response to it? What's your reaction to what she had to say?
Well, I think we have to take it in context in terms of what she said. You know, we're here commemorating the life of Harriet Tubman, who is certainly a major heroine. And as Marcus Garvey said, that we must honor our heroes and heroines, and so that we should select them ourselves and not have somebody else give us our heroes. And I think it's important that we do that for a moment and extract from her life the lessons that we learn as we come down to what Dr. Malveaux, you know, had to say, because she said it again within that context. And I think what's important to me in terms of Harriet Tubman is that she was born in slavery. And it's amazing that she had within herself that concept of freedom, so that she was able to free herself. Now, how she achieved that concept of freedom is important, because it means that she had to look into her own self, her own mindset, to understand that she was a free human being and not somebody who, quotes, was born a slave, because she was born into slavery, but she understood herself as a free human being. Now, interestingly enough, as she freed herself and was able to escape from the physicality of slavery and the abuse, she returned. And this is critical, because those of us who free ourselves in one way or another, and we will get to the understanding of freedom, we must return to free those who are still enslaved. And there are many who are still enslaved, because the parameters of enslavement are, you might say, 365 days of the year, and all around the globe, in terms of the European system of white supremacy that has been that has engulfed the world over the last 2,000 years, if not just the last 500 years. So that we are all still, in some sense, enslaved. While it may have been slavery, and then it was colonialism, and then we get to globalization. And that's where Dr. Malva was hitting at this extractive capitalism, and as she called it, predatory capitalism. But, you know, getting back to Harriet Tubman, she then developed her own concept of what it meant to be free. Freedom was not something that you enjoy by yourself. Freedom is something that you enjoy with others around you and others like you. So she went back to free those who were like her. Again, an interesting point is that not everyone who she went back to take to freedom wanted to be free. There were those who were satisfied with the status quo. And again, we can extrapolate that to the current time. And there are those who simply want to integrate and be part of the system, even though it is a system that has enslaved them and still brutalizes them. So we have to understand then that slavery is more than a physical entity. It is also a mental and cultural problem. And this is what we have not escaped from.
Dr. Garvey, is it that they didn't want to be free, or that they weren't aware of what freedom could be?
I don't know how you slice that. I don't know how you slice that. I would say that they did not want to be free, because freedom for them probably represented something that was risky. It was safer to be within the confines of Massa's plantation, where even though Massa would beat him, but Massa would feed him and Massa would clothe him. So there was that dependency on Massa. And that is the point, I think, that is important, that there were some who were so dependent on Massa that they had absorbed the idea of Massa as a master and themselves as a slave. So that became part of their modus operandi. And they were comfortable with that and would not leave that. So there were those then who did not want to be free for whatever the reason is. And I think that's the point, that they developed a dependent mentality on their situation. And many of us are like that. We're comfortable with where we are, even though there are limitations as to what we can do. And our potential is greater than where we are. So that brings us forward to us at the present time. And the strictures that we have in terms of predatory capitalism, and in terms of the systems that have been put in place here in these United States and internationally. And it's not just in terms of America, but it's all of those other things that have been set up, including the United Nations, including the World Bank, including the World Trade Organization, including the International Monetary Fund. These are all ways of enslaving the rest of humanity so that Europe and its allies can dominate us as the majority of the people on the planet. So then in terms of us defining our freedom, if we are free not just physically and free mentally, then we understand that we have to transform the system. It's not a matter of joining the system and being comfortable within the system. It's a matter of transforming the system. And that in itself is a revolutionary act. And this is where we must go. And this is where we must follow Harriet Tubman, because her act was revolutionary in her day in fighting the system, because she continued to fight the system even after she had brought all of those people out of slavery. And this is the thing that I admire about her, is that she did not rest, so to speak, when she had brought people out of slavery. She continued to want to transform the system. In other words, she built schools and hospitals, et cetera, in her community. And this is what we have to do, build community. We have not built community. We still have the dependency syndrome. Massa must do this, and Massa must do that, and Massa must do that. No, granted, and again, I get back to Dr. Malveaux. I mean, the viciousness with which the majority white group here has attacked us every time we have tried to rise, and every time we have developed something for ourselves independent of them that they aspire to, then they destroy us. They destroyed, attempted to destroy the UNIA, ACL, my father's movement. They destroyed Malcolm, they destroyed Martin Luther King. And, you know, and we have talked about Tulsa, and we have talked about the police brutality on the street, the militarized police, et cetera. It is there, it exists. Now, we have to organize, we have to unify to be able not simply to resist it, but to create an independent system of our own that we can stand on. And the only way we can do it and be successful is joining with the billion Africans in Africa and the diaspora. We can't do it by ourselves because the system here is extremely powerful.
Dr. Garvey, I just really very quickly wanted to ask you this question, because you've devoted your life to the study of science and medicine. And I'm curious as to what you see as being the kinds of linkages that need to be constructed to kind of stitch together the African diaspora when it comes to science and medicine. What would you like to see?
Well, basically, the basis of science in the West is scientific materialism. And believe it or not, matter per se is, we only know about 5% of the matter in the universe. So when you have a whole philosophy and a whole civilization that's based on scientific materialism, you know that they're lost. And if you understand the direction in which scientific materialism is going, then you can see, you know, why there's drought. We can see why there are fires in the Northwest, in California, or in Oregon. You can see why the hurricanes are increasing in intensity. You can see why they're flooding in Louisiana, and on and on and on. It's because of the nonsense of scientific materialism, which does not understand the interconnectedness of everything, and that everything starts with consciousness. Okay, but everything that they deal with scientifically, they take things apart and believe that they understand the thing when they understand the parts. So that their science is a small aspect of what science should really be, because science has to understand the whole. So you have to go back beyond the Big Bang and say, well, how did the Big Bang start? There had to be something, someone, some consciousness before the Big Bang. Consciousness didn't come after the Big Bang. So, you know, it's a whole difference in mentality, and you have to go back to Kemet to understand that. You know, who is Amun, who is Ra, who is Ptah? You know, this is the original Trinity. We had civilizations when those folks were, you know, cannibals and drinking the blood out of the skulls of their opponents, frozen in the goddamn Europe. So, you know, I mean, we know science. They don't know science. They know materialistic science, and they're using it to destroy the planet. I mean, you talk about medicine, just for one thing, what do we know about medicine? Do we know that medicine or health is the harmony between consciousness, mind, and the physical matter of the human being? And then there has to be the harmony between that and the environment. But we live in an environment where they tell you can do anything you don't want to do and then go to the doctor and he'll fix it. He doesn't fix it. He gives you a pill for the headache. He gives you a pill for your stomach ache. He gives you another pill for the ache in your knee. And he gives you another pill you can't sleep at night. And he gives you a pill for your depression. So what you have is big pharma. And you're treating symptoms, but you're not treating disease because you don't understand how disease develops and how it starts. How it starts, it's a disease, it's a disharmony. So it's a mental problem to begin with, which really is a spiritual problem to begin with. So it's a whole kettle of fish, and obviously we can't go into it deeply, at the present time. But I can tell you that, for the last, 100 years with quantum physics, scientific materialism has been turned on its head, but they haven't understood how to utilize the understanding of quantum physics to then transform their philosophy and way of life, because their philosophy and way of life is entrenched all the way back in Aristotle and his understanding of the universe. Because what quantum physics tells you is that consciousness is dominant in the universe.
Well, Dr. Garvey, you've certainly whetted our appetite for further conversation, for deeper conversation, and we'll have to create the opportunity for that. I did, though, want to ask Eureka Huggins-Axum if she's here. Is Eureka here?
Yes,
Oh,
yes, I am.
oh, super. Okay, I can't see it.
Greetings.
Eureka, I'm not sure if did you have a chance to hear Dr. Malvo's address?
I heard the last part of it because I was at the memorial breaking down our altar, sacred space that we did for Harriet Tubman. So I did hear it. And of course, she and Dr. Garvey, always amazing, of course, as the rest of your panelists. So, she always speaks truth to power. I mean, her words, her wisdom is fierce, but it's necessary. Like Dr. Garvey's wisdom is necessary for us.
The thesis of her argument, as you know, is that predatory capitalism is the bane of our existence. And I'm wondering if you could kind of comment on that.
Well, I can comment on it from the perspective of our organization, ADASI, the African Diaspora Ancestral Commemoration Institute. I can say that the reason why we were dehumanized and enslaved was to be used as capital, right? It was necessary. Christopher Columbus, the murderer and the thug, he set in motion Western racism, right? And so when we look at how our ancestors were used to build capital, then we have to really go back to understand how much and how we can break free of those chains that we still carry mentally. And that's the kind of work that ADASI does. We are dedicated to institutionalizing the remembrance of our ancestors who perished in the Middle Passage, the Ma'afa, as well as those who survived. And as Dr. Garvey mentioned earlier, why was it necessary to dehumanize us in order to enslave us? The question we ought to be asking as well, who were our ancestors before they were kidnapped, trafficked, and shipped? And that goes directly to what Dr. Garvey just mentioned. We built great empires. We gave the world its first humanity. The Europeans came and studied at the feet of African scholars at the University of Sankore at Timbuktu. Upwards of 20,000 scholars would come and study. They learn law, they learn science, they learn astronomy, mathematics. Those manuscripts are still with us. They're still in Mali. They're at the Library of Congress. You could see it online. So we need to flip the script, as they say. When we see those images of our ancestors on those slave ships, when they were stripped down from their physical, their mental, their cultural, spiritual being, when we see those images, there's a certain amount of shame and pain and fear and guilt that we carry when we see it. But when we listen to Dr. Garvey, when we listen to our scholars, Dr. John Henry Clark, Asa Hilliard, Jacob Brothers, you name them, Tony Browder, and we begin to understand our history of who we really are, then slavery is just a small period, a small portion of it. So then we can draw upon the richness of who we are. But we still have to look back. when we forget who we are, you know, history is not just names, faces, dates, and places. History tells us who we are, who took our economic powers, how they took it, when they took it, and how we can get it back. And so in going back and looking at that history, as you talk about capitalism, we, for our freedom, our capital freedom, we still got to go back and look at our history and examine it, and examine the consistencies of those who took us out and who still wants to take us out. But we need to draw on the strength of what Dr. Garvey mentioned, that history of who we really are. And then we begin to see the power of who we are. We begin to understand the resilience, why we have that resilience, and that we are special people. We are divine people. We are the first people of this planet. We have the original DNA, as some people may say. We have it. So I took a long time to answer your question, but I'm answering it from a perspective of Adasi and how our work is practical and is necessary.
Can you talk a little bit more about that work and talk about the kind of real cultural links that you've been building throughout the African diaspora over the decades?
So we are a nonprofit. We're 27 years old. We're a nonprofit education, cultural, and spiritual organization based in Washington, D.C. And Adasi was founded in order to institutionalize the remembrance of our ancestors who perished in the Ma'afa, as well as those who survived. And we do it in a very practical way through our programs and activities that features artists, activists, scholars, faith-based leaders, youth advocates. We examine the conditions that had led up to the Ma'afa and how we can learn from that. Our work is also, you know, it focuses on the healing and the restoration from that trauma of the Ma'afa. We look at how we can break that collective amnesia that we still suffer from, and how to restore the dignity of those nameless, faceless men, women, and children, those babies who perished in the Ma'afa. So we look at that, and we also try to address the shame and the pain and the fear and the guilt that we still carry in our DNA. And we know that through Dr. Joy Gare, in her post-traumatic slave syndrome, we know that this is being passed on from generation to generation. Dr. Kevin Washington, who is an Adasi advisor, says that it's not post, we're still in that trauma. And so the people who we learned from, Dr. John Henry Clark, the great Grand Master historian, he was an Adasi advisor, our principal advisor, Dr. Clark, until he made his transition to the ancestors. And so he advised us on the dates, on speakers. And so we literally sat at his feet to learn how we should develop Adasi. And so we, in addition to Dr. Clark being our principal advisor, Babakar Joseph Njai, who was the curator of the slave house on Goree Island, he was also one of the impetus behind the founding of Adasi. And Haile Garima, a well-known filmmaker, serves as one of our advisors, and a whole host of people. But we also connect, we have sites in Adasi Senegal, Adasi Nigeria, Adasi Cameroon, and Adasi Brazil, and they work primarily with youth. And so, like I said, we commemorate the ancestors in a very progressive way. We also, through the educational forum, and like I said, we examine the conditions that has led up to the Ma'afa. We also feel that it's important to engage our youth, and we do that through our film series and discussions. Our most recent one a year ago was the footprints, looking at the film Footprints of Pan-Africanism by Shirikiana Garima, Haile Garima's wife. It's a powerful film. If you haven't seen it, please get a copy of that. And so we have these young people sit and discuss, what does Pan-Africanism mean to them in the 21st century? You know, how does young people in the US, African Americans in the US, connect with Afro-Brazilians, Afro-Colombians on the continent, those trans-border kinds of issues that they should be discussing. So racism in America is the same racism in Brazil, in Colombia, you name it. So we feel it's necessary to stimulate their intellectual capacity beyond these cell phones. They need to engage in some serious discussion. So we engage the youth. And as a spiritual organization as well, we create these sacred spaces, these altars or these memorials, like the one we created today for Mama Harriet Tubman. These are our sacred spaces. I know Izmira has seen quite a few of them. They're usually very elaborate. But we also know through Haile Gerima and his research that the ancestors, one of the first things that they did when they tried to run away from the enslavement, they created altars so that they can connect with their creator, with their ancestors, and with the divinity within. So we create these sacred spaces that allows people when they come to see the Adasi, or if we're creating it for an organization like the Smithsonian or the UNESCO or whomever, they can also connect. They're very elaborate because the ancestors deserve something elaborate. Those who perish in the Ma'afa, we need to give them flowers, memorials. We need to give them our love, and we haven't done that. So that's one of the practical ways. And then there's also, we host an international annual commemoration. We usually do ours. It's a healing ceremony, a spiritual healing ceremony. You'll see a bit of it later on. And we go under the 11th Street Bridge to do this spiritual healing ceremony. We are also one of the founders of the International Coalition to commemorate the ancestors of the Ma'afa. And this is a coalition of organizations and individuals all across the US and in other countries, including all of the Adasi sites, where every second weekend in June is an International Commemoration Weekend. And we designated that. We did not wait for UNESCO or anybody. We designated that second weekend, commemorate the ancestors in very practical ways. And so another way that we have done so is we have created this really, I'm doing a PSA right now. This is a guide on how to commemorate the ancestors by Adasi, a very practical guide. Right. It tells you practical things that you can do. Plant a tree, read consciousness raising books, like Dr. Garvey's books, like you name the books, like Marcus Garvey. You know, make sure you have a red, green, and black flag in your home to remember who you are. And for young people, commemorate the ancestors by interviewing your ancestors, your elders. You know, starting a business, buy black 365 days. So those are like practical ways. Yeah. And we also tell you how to create your own altar. So
plenty.
So well, that's a lot. I said a lot. We try to be very practical.
Eureka, I'm going to move on to the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Togo, Dr. Robert Ducey, because Dr. Ducey, I did want you to also comment on the presentation by Dr. Melville, but before that, I wanted you to just to kind of allude to what Eureka was talking about, because I was curious as to what you see as being the kind of Pan-Africanism that the African diaspora needs in the 21st century. What does that Pan-Africanism look like? What must it be? Is Dr. Ducey there? Okay, I fear he's maybe not there.
I don't think so. I don't think he's there.
Okay, well perhaps Mel, because you were the next person, maybe I can turn to you and ask you the same question. You know, what does the Pan-Africanism of the 21st century that the African diaspora needs, what does it look like? And what does it consist of?
You know, when I came, I've been working in Africa my whole career, and I was brought back to the U.S. from Africa really to educate Americans about Africa and build a base of support. One of the things I found was that we're very divided people. You know, the African Americans don't talk to the African immigrant. The Afro-Caribbeans are not part of the discussion. The young people are not talking to the old people. The women are not talking to the men. So the bottom line, what you have is a real fragmented Black community that almost seems to be rudderless. Right now, we seem to be lacking leadership. We lack any kind of cohesion. There's no game plan for us. I mean, what is our strategy for America? You know, what do we want the U.S. policy toward Africa to be? What do we want? You know, how do we do business in Africa? How do we as African Americans do business in Africa? You know, all of these questions are still out there. So I think realistically, where we find ourselves is that we have a long way to go. You know, we definitely need to find a comprehensive strategy for unity that we all can buy into. That don't mean that we have to be in the same political space. That don't mean that we have to agree to work with each other on specific things, but it means that we should have a general outline as to how we should be working together. Now, CFA is actually trying to fulfill that mandate. One of our partners is Canada. This year, we decided to reach out to the Canadian African diaspora and just to partner with them. And so we had a few phone calls that led to a couple forums. We're doing something on Tuesday, to look at this strategy of unity among the diaspora. What we found is the only reason we haven't spoken to the Canadian diaspora before. Many of us thought that you need a passport to talk to the Canadians. Well, you don't, Now, one of the upsides of the corona pandemic, while we're not able to meet like we normally meet, we're not able to travel and get on airplanes and fly all over the place like we normally do. But we found out that we can meet on Zoom. We can have a meeting this afternoon with the Canadians, with the Caribbean, with the Latinos. There's nothing preventing us from having these kind of conversations, and we're doing that. So we think we're on the right track. We think we're on the right train, but we have a long way to go, realistically speaking, if we are to move forward as an African people. I don't want to be, here in Cambridge with the spirit of Harriet Tubman, behind the backdrop. You feel optimistic. You see they're working with their young people. They have a group, they call them the young ambassadors, and they help these young people stand up and be strong and understand who they are and understand where they're going. We need to multiply this. We need to multiply it in Chicago and Detroit, Los Angeles, and across the United States, and really across the world.
Mel, I want to pin you down a little bit, and I want you to kind of outline what those priorities should be, because in terms of this Pan-African agenda, like what should that agenda look like? If you were constructing the blueprint, what would your priorities be?
Well, we need a couple hours just to talk about that, be honest with you.
We don't have it.
We don't. But
so
I think
we need a précis. We need a précis.
The bigger thing I see is a unity of purpose. When I see a meeting on Africa, I want to see African Americans. I want to see African immigrant. I want to see Afro-Caribbean. I want to see Africans from the ground in Africa who happen to be involved. We have to start working more in a unified fashion. I think that's the biggest challenge. Now, Americans here in this country, Americans remain uneducated, undereducated, and miseducated about Africa. That was intentional. They wanted they wanted us to think bad about Africa. All they want to do is fight over there. They're in the jungle, nobody's organized. And then they tell them the bad things about us. So Africans are thinking that we're now all gangbangers, drug dealers, the most negative. So this is intentional. And part of it is divide and conquer so that they can continue to get the minerals out of Africa. They can continue to get the resources out of Africa. But they don't want African Americans in line with Africans in the diaspora or on the ground in Africa. So the battle is to unify, to find common ground and to move forward in a range of areas. We got to make sure that we engage the next generation of leaders. I talk about those who came before me and C. Payne Lucas and Leon Sullivan and all these dynamic individuals, but they did not pick us up. They did not say, Mel, this is how we go. This is the direction we go. Some of the things that Harriet Tubman was espousing, they didn't do that. And so I spend a lot of my time making sure I'm talking to young people. President Obama's Young African Leaders Initiative, I actually wrote the paper for that, and encouraged Obama's administration to engage young people in Africa. So we have a lot of work to do, but a big part of this is engaging the next generation and making sure that those of us who are over, say, 60 years old, like myself, that we are spending our full time preparing and sharing what we know with the next generation that's coming up behind us.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps I can bring Dr. Malveaux back into the conversation. Dr. Malveaux, are you still there?
Yeah, she's still here. Hold on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is she able to hear the
I'm here.
discussion? You're here. Because Dr. Malveaux, because it's now almost a quarter century since the first, I guess, non-racial elections in South Africa. And there was a tremendous amount of hope. And many people in, dare I say, your generation were involved in the anti-apartheid movement. I was involved as a student back in the late 1980s, 1990s. People had a tremendous amount of hope, for example, for the future of South Africa. 25 years later, we have an administration that is led by Black South Africans, and yet it would seem that much of the population of South Africa has been left out and has not been able to enjoy the fruits of that power. And I'm wondering, what are the lessons perhaps that we can learn from what has gone on in South Africa over the last 26 years?
Well, thank you for that question. I was very involved in the Free South Africa movement. Also, there was a proposition on the San Francisco ballot, Proposition J, named after me, that divested city pension funds from companies doing business with South Africa in 1984. And we all, I think the United States, everybody felt some sense of optimism about whether or not things could change. But here's the challenge. If you leave the structure the same, which is why the Black Lives Matter young people are talking about structural racism. If you leave the structure the same and put different people on top, you're going to end up with the same outcomes. So if you have, if corporations are being favored, they're still being favored. I mean, the Sullivan principles did some things for some workers in South Africa, mine workers in particular, but it wasn't universal. I had the privilege of visiting South Africa, I think in 2011. And I took a Bennett student with me actually also to basically just see some things and to look at some of the universities. The needs are great. Education has not been prioritized to the extent that it should be. And there has been no real redistribution of resources. So the Black people who are getting ahead in South Africa now are really the Black middle class and upper class. I mean, basically, when if you go down to the grassroots level, if you look, there's still some people who aren't even being educated. They have no access to education. So the lessons, I mean, the issue is look at structure. I mean, you can't just talk about, look at our own situation here in the United States after the passage of the Civil Rights Act. You can't just say, I change a law, like Dr. King said, the law cannot make you love me, but it can keep you from lynching me. But you can prohibit violence and not get equality or economic justice at the same time. So if we're really interested in economic justice, we have to be a bit more radical and really talk about dismantling aspects of predatory capitalism.
Dr. Garvey, I see you nodding your head. Please, if you have something to add.
Maybe I was falling asleep.
Well, I didn't want to say that. I respect my elders. I didn't want to say that. I didn't want to draw attention to that.
No, I wasn't. I was listening very attentively.
Indeed.
Actually, Dr. Malvo, she certainly woke me up. She wakes me up all the time. That's the problem. It's structure. And who has created the structure? And it's the same structure that has come out of Europe in terms of feudalism, in terms of slavery, in terms of colonialism, in terms of post-colonialism, in terms of globalization. It's an oligarchic system. And now there's the danger of it being a fascistic system right here in the United States of America. So it's not about us adopting that system, because that system is the one that has marginalized us, sucked our resources, killed us, raped us, etc., for hundreds of years. And if you look at South Africa, Nelson Mandela had to make certain compromises because of the actual threat of physical violence of the white minority. I mean, they had all these arms, and certainly they would have gone to war, I'm pretty sure, and that's what Mandela thought. And he had to make a compromise. But the whole economic structure, echoing Dr. Malvo, stayed within the hands of the white minority, and it still is. It's 80 to 9%, up to 90% of the economic wealth, etc., is in the hands of the 5% or 10% of the minority, with a couple of Indians thrown in. So the structure has not changed, but you have some black faces up front. We used to call it the spook in the window, when it's quotes integration became popular here in the United States. Everybody would get a black face, and usually they're in charge of personnel or something like that. But obviously they're not making any decisions, and the system hasn't changed. The system hasn't changed, the system hasn't changed, the system hasn't changed. If we want change, we have to change the system. If we want change, we have to build our own systems. That's the bottom line. And just in terms of a definition of quotes of capitalism, you know, capitalism is simply a way of using money. And it's not any different from talking about land and talking about agriculture. You can't get rid of capital. You can't get rid of capitalism, but it's how you use capital. It's how you use land in terms of your agricultural policy. Now, you can't define economics as simply something that's totally about finance and about shareholder profit, and does not deal with where the company is, what resources it extracts, what pollution there is, et cetera, et cetera. So economics is not a science, and it's not a science to the exclusion of the sociology within which capitalism exists and the economics exist. And this is the business of scientific materialism, which is reductionism. And this is why we need an African approach, which looks at the whole thing together, because everything is interconnected. So I think I made a long statement, but did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. You did.
Okay.
And I want Izmira to follow you, but just before I get to Izmira, I did want to encourage people who are listening, who are watching, if you'd like to participate in the conversation, if you have any questions, please direct those to the chat. You can direct those questions to everyone, and I'll certainly bring those up. And I'm just going to read one letter that we received. It's from Leslie Mukwedeya. And Leslie writes, as a first-generation immigrant of African descent, I'm not particularly convinced that real economic and political freedom will come from the present generation of African leaders, save for a handful who have bought into a system. Thanks, Dr. Garvey, for recognizing that we have to work outside of the system. Izmira, I was just wondering if you could carry on with and maybe address some of the kind of essential points that Dr. Garvey and Dr. Malveaux have made.
Yes, sure. And also the comment that was made from the audience, that's a very important point. I mean, he said she said the current generation of leaders. I'm assuming they mean elected officials. And in this country, we have this conundrum where it's legalized bribery, pay for play with campaign donations in this era of Citizen United Supreme Court ruling that renders money as speech and people as commodities. And so that's very problematic when you do have leaders in the political system that's beholden to the highest bidder, that tend to be deep pocket, endless pocket corporations in the oligarchic class that Dr. Garvey alluded to.
Is there a way out, Izmira? Is there a way out of this?
Yes, there is. I mean, they're more of people if you look at it as a pyramid, the masses are at the bottom. So we're sleeping giants if we were to wake up and up in the system by any means necessary, hopefully not violent, but the past is prologue. I mean, violence has been, and I'm not advocating violence, but it has been pretty effective, as Dr. Malveaux mentioned. When you're dealing with people who do see money as the only profit, as the top value, then you have to, you can't appeal to people's conscience. And if they don't see us on par with their humanity, then they're not going to respond to any type of moral appeal anyway. So boycott, divest, sanction, as Yuri said, buy black. That's something I live by diligently since I had my first dollar from my paper route. You have to be very selective with where you spend your dollars. So I do feel it's necessary, but in the age of, respectability Negroes, it's kind of difficult to get a critical mass of people in this era to do that. And I mean, and I know my generation has been quite critical of the baby boomer leaders, but I always try to be compassionate in my assessment. I mean, if you look at how our leaders were assassinated, from, as Dr. Garvey mentioned, from Malcolm to Martin, to Medgar Evers, to what happened to Marcus Garvey. I mean, I'm thinking of people I know of my daddy's era. It really incited a whole lot of fear of stepping out of the boundaries of what's necessary to really upend and reform, revolutionize the system into something much more just. So I think it's possible, but we really have to step outside of the parameters of what is visible and what's deemed as proper now. I mean, people couldn't even vote for Bernie Sanders without being demonized and ostracized and marginalized, and treated by some Democrats worse than they treat Republicans. So we really have to be fearless, as our, mama, sister, warrior Harriet Tubman was, and not be content, as Dr. Frances Cress Welsing used to say, finding a more comfortable place in the shade of white supremacy from a very individualistic standpoint, keeping up with the Joneses, having this very corrupt value system where money is our only profit and progress. So we can't just keep perpetuating this as white supremacy in blackface. We really have to see things from a perspective of Africanity, collectivism, and a change value system. But it definitely is possible. But people have to be fearless and visionary in carrying it out.
Yeah. Eureka, Harriet Tubman undoubtedly was fearless. But she was also someone, in the 19th century, she had a radical imagination. And there's a question from A. Newman here. And A. Newman asks, how do you think that Harriet Tubman would respond to the situation today for Black people?
I got my picture.
I'm sorry.
Let's get a picture with her. Come on.
I didn't, I'm hearing Mel.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, what was your last sentence?
No, I was saying that we just received a note from an A. Newman who's watching, and A. Newman says, how do you think that Harriet Tubman would respond to the situation today for Black people?
Wow. Well, I mean, she definitely was a warrior. I think she would have inspired the young people quite a lot, because her spirit, her energy was very transformative. And so I think that an engagement with her and the young people probably would take us to another stage. But I think because she has African values, I think she would also understand the value that elders bring, the wisdom that elders bring. And I think she would also want us to make certain that we have the elders and the young people sitting together and figuring out how to manifest that revolution that will bring about the change that we need. I mean, she was a very spiritual woman, from what we understand. She's an African woman, so she obviously drew upon those spirits of the divinity within her. She called on her ancestors. That intuition that she had, this North Star that she followed, all of that is her spirit and the ancestors talking to her. So I think what she would have brought together would have been the spirituality, the African wisdom of elders and the youth coming together to be able to address this from a more of a holistic perspective. And I think we see a lot of young people in the streets, but we cannot ignore the wisdom that our elders have brought, because they have struggled. So they know they have those nuggets that the young people need, because the young people, they've got the energy. I think when we can come together like that, and we can utilize the technology as well to be able to spread the word, I think that is the way that we can be revolutionary in our thinking in the 21st century.
Julianne Malveaux, when I think of Harriet Tubman, I can't help but think of someone like an Ella Baker, who had this kind of incorruptibility about her. And she was a kind of a free radical, in that she was untethered to convention. She was untethered to power in a certain kind of way. And I'm wondering what that can teach us about how we could be navigating the spaces that we occupy in the 21st century.
Thanks for the question about especially Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer. These were modern, they were modern Fannie Lou Hamers. And then when you look at the things that they had to sacrifice, the things that they experienced. I mean, when I think about Fannie Lou Hamer being partially blinded in one eye and actually dying from untreated breast cancer. When you think about Ella Baker and all the organizing she did, one of the things that we must learn, and Harriet Tubman reminds us more than anyone, we cannot afford to have sexism in the African-American community. We cannot afford to have sexism. The leadership roles are apportioned by gender. We've all proven that all of us are capable, and so more frequently we need to look at women in positions of leadership. The other thing that I think we learn, well, self-care. We don't talk about that enough, and we must talk about self-care. There's so many sisters and brothers who work themselves basically to the bone for the movement. A leaky vessel cannot carry anybody's water. And if you really want to be a change agent, one of the things that you can model is good health habits. I mean, it sounds simple, but you know, I've seen so many people say, I'm gonna forego this meal. I'm guilty because I've got all this work to do, or something like that. We're not effective when we're not at our best. But then when we look at the physical challenges that Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker had, you gotta be ready, gotta be ready. And again, I think that question is so important because when we look at our history, I mean, I talked about Maggie Lena Walker before when I gave my keynote. The people who don't know about Maggie Lena, it becomes so very frustrating that while we talk about Black history, African history, we don't lift up the women in our history who have made a tremendous difference.
Izmira, you're nodding your head, and I was wondering if you had a comment.
Well, that just really struck a chord of tragic memories. I mean, I'm 40 years old and I don't have enough fingers and toes to count how many of my peers have worked their way into the ground for the progress of our movements and met a premature death. So self-care really is a first, a must. It's probably the most revolutionary act that we could be performing right now as we are under assault, as there is this fear of a Black planet, as we see the abbreviated lifespans of Black males especially. So I just really want to underscore what she said. You can't pour from an empty cup, but as women especially, we're taught to be selfless and sacrificial for men and the movement and the family and the company and the office and the culture and the neighborhood. But longevity is important. Continuity really has its place. I didn't know my maternal grandmother because she died young because of just the horrors of racism. And so that disconnect, it really is another injury on our people, on our psyche, and again, on our longevity. So self-care, it seems selfish, but it's really selfless because we, you know, as we age through our cohort of change makers, we have to be around to really pass these lessons down to the next generation. And if we're burnt out psychologically, physically, can't move around because of poor diets or too much wear and tear on our body, we've lost the game. We've lost the war. So, what Dr. Melvin said is really, 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 really important. Self-care. I think Audre Lorde said that, another woman who studied in Germany, that taking care of yourself is a revolutionary act in and of itself in this era. So, amen.
Dr. Garvey, I did not want to exclude someone who was very close to your heart as well, and that's your mother, Amy Jakes Garvey, because she was also a woman ahead of her time. And she also was a woman, she also was a pioneer and in the tradition of a Harriet Tubman, you know, in line with the likes of Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer. What are some of the kind of lessons? We talk often about your father, but what are some of the lessons perhaps that we could learn from your mother, the way in which your mother approached things in the world?
Well, I think my mother was a perfect mate, if you will, for my father as a revolutionary person. You don't often see that. She was a perfect mate from the point of view of her intellect. She challenged him in terms of his ideas and what he thought and so on. And she assisted him left, right, and center. She started out initially as a secretary. She had a training as a legal secretary back in Jamaica. And she graduated from one of the major high schools, which was very significant at that time in terms of an educational background. So she was equally educated as he was. And, you know, they would go at it tooth and nail in terms of intellect. So he didn't look down on her, and obviously she felt that she was his equal intellectually, and that was okay. It was not a problem. And, you know, my father, to his credit, also, you know, had, shall we say, equal opportunity for women in the movement. And, you know, we won't go into that at the present time, but there were so many women presidents, etc., and women in different high positions. And my mother, she ran the women's page for the Negro world during that period of time. And then again, when he was imprisoned, she collected his works in terms of the philosophy and opinions, and she published it. And she kept the organization, you know, alive, not by herself, of course, but with many others. And then the same thing, you know, when he went back to Jamaica in 1927, obviously she went with him. She bore him 2 children, which was a great gift to him. He somewhat idolized us as his offspring, which was good for him in terms of, you know, his all-round humanity. And, you know, we went to England with him in 1935. And, you know, she kept the family together. And then significantly in terms of that period of time, we ended up having to come back to Jamaica in 1938 because the World War was beginning to heat up, so to speak, or pre-World War II, 1940. And my brother had a problem with his legs in terms of arthritis, the right leg. And being the mother that she was, she knew that he had to come back to a warm climate. And she was advised to do that by the doctor. So that was where they had, you might say, their first disagreement. He didn't want us to leave him in England alone by himself because he was fearful for us that he wouldn't be able to protect us, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, the motherly instinct prevailed and she brought us back to Jamaica. He died in 1940, but she brought us up as if he was there. She never remarried. You know, she had been totally dedicated to the movement. She educated a lot of people who came to Jamaica to learn about Garveyism and the movement from the inside, you know, many people. And she raised us to respect our father, and she taught us Garveyism, if you will, you know, with our mother's milk. So she raised 2 kids that try in some way to carry on their father's legacy. So I think she was the best of wives. And, you know, in terms of what Dr. Malveaux said, you know, my mother in her book, Garvey and Garveyism, recalls that she was down to 90 pounds after she had finished, you know, publishing the philosophy and opinions of Marcus Garvey, because of all the work that she had to do, and, you know, to try to get the money to put the different articles together and so on and so forth, and the struggle of the time. So, you know, it takes a toll. She was a strong woman, of course, and obviously survived and went on to have 2 children, et cetera, et cetera. But she was totally dedicated, and the rest of her life was dedicated to carry on his message with the UNIA, et cetera, in Jamaica. and maintaining a correspondence all over the world with many different people, and participating, shall we say, in the 1945 Manchester Conference in terms of recommending different things to different people and so on, and how the conference should be set up, etc. So my mother, fathered me, if you will, in terms of my development. I looked up to her. She's a strong woman, and she instilled in us Garveyism. She instilled in us that, nothing but the best of was good enough for us, and that we should never disgrace the Garvey name. So, both myself and my brother always tried to, you might say, achieve excellence in terms of who we are and what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to our mother.
Yeah, well, I think you've honored that. I think you've honored that that contract that you had with her. We have a comment. And I'm just looking at the time. We have about 5 minutes to go. We do have a comment from Denise Bailey, and Denise says, "Excellent discussion. Our young people are missing from this discussion. What is the message of this group of elders to us?" And Eureka, I think I'm going to begin with you. What's your message to the young people?
I would say to our young people that a critical thing for you to do is to actually study with those who have studied their African culture. Mel has given me a sign on the other side there. Study your history. Study your history. Go back and reach and understand what you can draw upon in order to help yourself move forward. You've got, the re-education is critical. Re-education, understand who you are.
Izmira, I know you said your age, and I won't repeat it, but you're still young in my books.
Hey, I'm proud 41.
You're still young in my books, but in terms of addressing the young people, what's the message as an elder now? What is a message that you have?
Well, I like this quote by Frantz Fanon that really guided me as a child who was kind of ostracized for being a bit too radical and too allergic to injustice at a time when a lot of my peers weren't. Frantz Fanon said something like, each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. So the battlefield, the terrain that I fought on and I still fight on as a 40-year-old differs from Dr. Melvin, from Mel, from Dr. Garvey, from Eureka. You really have to customize it, learn from our lessons, talk to elders, not necessarily about the successes, but about the losses and what we did wrong. And adapt that to the new playing field and keep pushing forward, and do not betray our ancestors. No matter how comfortable it may look to do so or how alienating it might feel, don't betray the wins that were already made and continue them forward.
Dr. Melvin, your message to young people.
I will echo what many of the others have said. First of all, education, education, education. It's not just about getting a degree. I mean, even after you graduated, keep reading, keep writing, keep thinking. Folks who don't do anything but read the newspapers are short-circuiting themselves. They need to read. I mean, put yourself a goal, a book a month, 2 books a month, something like that, and really add to your knowledge base. And the other thing is learn economics. One of the most frustrating things that happens to me, I might be at an event or something, and someone will say, "What do you do?" "I'm an economist." "Oh, I flunked economics." Don't brag about that. That's not funny, and it's not necessary. But a lot of people have a mental block against economics, and you have to understand economics is one of the keys to our freedom.
Okay. Dr. Garvey, your comment to young people.
Well, I'll follow Izmira with a quote from my dad. God and nature first made us what we are, and then out of our own creative genius, we make ourselves what we want to be. So it's our responsibility to be who we want to be, and our life is our message. Now, of course, to be able to accomplish that, we need to be educated, which is what everybody is saying. And as Carter G. Woodson has told us, we're being miseducated by the system that we're under, even up to the present time. So we have to reach for those books that we've talked about, whether it's John Henry Clark, Dr. Ben, Van Sertimo, Marcus Garvey, et cetera, on and on. And the young people have to educate themselves outside of the system. That's where the real education is. And they have to go back to original civilizations. Kemet is the model civilization. And if you know a lot about Kemet, then you'll be able to handle most of the nonsense that was going to come your way. And because it's the beginning of a spiritual civilization, if you will, which is what Africanity is all about. We're a spiritual people. And what we're trying to bring into operation, shall we say, is African humanism, which is a spiritual approach to life itself and the environment.
Adrian, if I may just add something really quickly to Mel and Jeannine and the CFA organizers' credit. A lot of the audience might not know this, but there was a full forum, a full Zoom call before this one of young ambassadors that specifically focused on how to engage and energize young people and connecting them to the diaspora and weaving in African-American youth who tend to be excluded or omitted or just absent from this type of work. So young people had their time before this. So I just wanted to insert that.
Well, Izmira, thanks for making that important intervention. And with that, that brings us to the end of our session. I'd like to thank all of our wonderful panelists. I'd like to thank Mel FOOTE. I'd like to thank Izmira Aitch. I'd like to thank Dr. Julius Garvey. I'd like to thank Eureka Huggins-Axum. And also I'd like to thank Dr. Julianne Malveaux for her participation in the panel and of course for her really incisive address. And thank you, our audience, for participating. And this is just the beginning of a conversation that will certainly continue. We'd like to thank CFA as well and all the crew behind this for all the.
Adrian, can I get one word in before?
Oh, you can. You disappeared, Mel, so I wasn't sure if you were still there.
No, I watched the whole thing.
Okay.
No, part of the, we're in the Harriet Tubman Education Center in Cambridge. And one of the participants is an artist named Miriam Moran. And she's been patiently joining us. She's done a beautiful painting rendition of Nelson Mandela out of salt. No brush, no acrylics, it's salt. And so I wanted to at least show the picture, and
Sure.
Maybe you want to have a word, please.
Hi, my name is Mary Moran, and I'm an artist here in Dorchester County, which I'm very proud resident. So I wanted to do a portrait of Nelson Mandela and honor him. I want to honor Nelson Mandela because he's an inspiration to me, my family, and so many others. And I hope.
We only see Melvin. I'm just telling whoever has
Oh, okay. And here, I did the portrait here.
Oh.
I think we're having a little bit of trouble. I think there's a bit of an audio trouble. Could you get a little bit closer to the microphone?
To know that we are listening and we care and we want to change in this community.
Right.
We'd like to be a part of that change.
Okay.
No.
So, sorry, Mel. Unfortunately, I think we're having some audio trouble.
Oh.
Mel, perhaps you could just summarize. Perhaps you could just summarize what the speaker said, because many of us were unable to hear what she said.
Do you want to come and sit here?
We seem to be encountering some audio trouble. I'm going to ask Mel. Can you hear me? Okay, I think we're. All there?
Hold
Okay.
on for a second. Hold on.
Okay, no problem.
Technology issue.
Indeed. Okay.
Oh. I wish I could bring my phone, like laptop there.
I'm sure we will be resuming very, very soon. So apologies again for the technical difficulties that we're encountering right now, but they should be, oh, there it is. Okay. I'm not sure people can see the work of art that she created out of salt.
Oh, there you go.
There it is. There it is. Did they hear her?
Yeah, let me
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, hi, I'm glad to be here. My name is Miriam Moran, and I'm a resident of Dorchester County. I want to be here particularly because us youth are listening. We want a change in this community. And so I'm glad to be a part of this change, and I wanted to honor Nelson Mandela. He's one of my greatest inspirations, especially when it comes to education. So here it is, with just salt.
That's fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Can we introduce
Another Adrian.
Adrian Holmes?
She must be good people. If she has a name like Adrian, she must be.
Buildings here in Westchester, in Dorchester County. So you want to say?
Thank you guys so much for just opening the Ron Brown series here in Cambridge. It has been a fantabulous day. I can't wait for this virus to be lifted. And like our mayor said, for you to come and visit and bring your energy and we exchange idea and thought. We're so honored to have Dr. Malvo here in town and Eureka Huggins here in town. So just thank you for allowing us to be a part of this awesome kickoff to the Ron Brown series. Thank you.
Ashe. Ashe.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, so thank you all for your participation, and we look forward to the next conversation. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.
Too.
Ashe. Harriet Tubman.
Thank you, Adrian.